Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today for our Stories, Our Voices, FPCC's Fall 2025 online learning series. FPCC supports language, culture, heritage, and arts revitalization for BC First Nations. And one of our offices is located in the village of Jotlip, also known as Sartlip, near Brentwood Bay. And we also have an office in Tecumlip's to Secwepemc. My name is Leah Anthony, and I'm an arts program coordinator with the FPCC arts team. And I'm so excited to be here with you all today. I'm of the Nakasley Wooten band, as well as Portuguese on my mom's side, and French Canadian and English Irish on my dad's side. And today I'm calling in from the beautiful and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. And please feel welcome to share in the chat where you're joining from today and just say hello to us. So this year, the FPCC Arts Program is hosting the online learning series, which is open to anyone involved in revitalization work or who wants to learn and be inspired by our webinar presenters. And today I'm so looking forward to hearing from Shoshannah Green about her creative journey, inspirations, and learning more about her processes. It's been so great getting to connect with Shoshannah over the last few years and see her work, and I got to see her work in person a couple years ago, and we're just so grateful to have her here with us today and to hear the stories that she'll be sharing with us. So the session will be about an hour and a half, with the last 30 minutes being open for the question and answer period. And if you do have questions during the presentation, please do put them in the Q&A function, which you can find in your toolbar at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And you're also welcome to share reactions throughout the presentation. Great way to engage because we can't see your faces right now. So awesome to send those reactions. But now I'm going to be turning it over to Shoshannah to share with us.
Tingaitla, good morning. Skitgung Hall Hanudakigaga. Shoshannah is my Haida, or my English name. Skitgung Hall is my Haida name. I'm a part of the Stewas Haida guy from Skunol, or also known as Kamshua. I was born and raised here in Haida Gwaii and grew up in Skidegate, where I've just recently moved back to my hometown here in Paraguay. And yeah, I'm super happy to be here. It's been nice to get to know these experiences and things like that. Having some technical challenges learning how to make a slideshow, but I hope it works out. All right, so the thing that I wanted to share for this presentation was about basically my journey in becoming a Haida artist. I feel like it wasn't super linear, but it was linear that I always wanted to be an artist. And one thing when I was starting to learn Formline that would be so frustrating would everyone who was already further in their career would say to look at the old pieces and study from those. And I never understood that until I actually started to do that. So yeah. Uh, I always was an artist. I love to draw. I love to create. I really enjoyed drawing animals and attempted portraits and things like that. These pigs always crack me up. That was a self-portrait and just some images of me growing up in Skidegate. Um, and then from an early age, sorry, I didn't challenge or try this just going right. Holy, my nerves are starting to set in. Okay. From an early age, I'd always loved to draw attempts at portraits, but mostly animals and cartoons. If there was something on TV that wasn't a cartoon, I wasn't interested. I never missed an episode of Pokemon or Digimon and could rewatch The Lion King 6 times in a row without being bothered. I always knew that I loved drawing and cartoons. And later, one of my best friend cousins and I bonded over a new TV show on YTV called Inuyasha. We spent most of the majority of our days in our youth drawing cartoons together, making up characters and worlds they lived in. She brought up one day becoming an animator for a career, which I was mind blown because there were jobs to animate the cartoons we watched repeatedly. From there, we both worked hard on our skills to work towards becoming animators. I was lucky to have supportive parents growing up. My mom put me in a lot of after-school painting classes with local artists who've now become good friends and mentors to me. And my dad would always gas me up if my work was the best he's ever seen. And my stepdad would be amazed that I could render a drawing beyond a stick man, a style that he does great in. Haida art wasn't really an interest to me, but I like to highlight this eagle design here in the mix of them because there was little glimmers of it from while I was young drawing. I remember with this piece specifically, I was at what used to be called Nystal Society here, and Robert Davidson was hosting two workshops, the Introduction to Haida Art or the Haida Alphabet. And I drew this in one of my art classes. I think I was 16 or 17, and I was so proud of this piece. So I went to show it to him and asked him for tips on how he could critique it or make it better. And he smiled and just said he doesn't make drawings like these. And so I still continued on with drawing. I taught myself Photoshop and things. I drew a lot with a mouse. This was my first digital drawing here in the middle on the top. Um, and I progressed to try and understand how to draw more Disney-esque styles. In grade 12, I applied to a whole bunch of different universities, hoping to get out of Haida Gwaii and go study art. Emily Carr University of Art and Design was the first one to accept my application. I called my art teacher, Miss Bizzario, to let her know, and she was so excited. She was jumping up and down on the phone. And the next morning, I was late for school that day, and Miss Bizzario had that news on the morning announcements. So I'd missed that, which I always thought was really cute. Entering Emily Carr was really exciting, but also very overwhelming for me as I went from one of the few artists in my high school to then being in a school filled with amazing artists. It really humbled me, and I cried when I received my first F on an art assignment I was proud of. The program was a pretty large learning curve. We did a lot of things that were outside of my norm, like life drawing and different art practices and ways of thinking about things that was just not on my radar because I was so focused on wanting to become a cartoonist. Um, while I was away in Vancouver, I would talk about being Haida and being from here so much. And then people would start to ask me so many questions. And I realized that I didn't know that much beyond, like what I thought I knew. My dad was a carver, my uncles were carvers, and I grew up here and I grew up in the culture, but I realized I didn't grow up in the culture in a way that I knew how to share and explain. And this was my first year living away from Skidegate, actually, was when I went to Emily Carr. And so it was a really big adjustment for me. And I was getting quite homesick. So in my elective class, I was in the first animation, or my first experience of doing animation. And so with being so homesick, I decided to do an animation. And the Formline cracks me up with this guy. And I really felt like I had to prove myself, and I stayed up so much that I barely slept trying to work on these essays and animating this final project. So I'll just play it for you guys now. Is it working? Nice. So that was an omnibus. So that had to end in a certain way. Oops. How do I get back to full screen? Ah, sorry, I thought I had this earlier. Let me quickly exit slideshow. Okay, so this had to end in a certain way because the next artist in my class would take that last drawing and turn it into the next. Um, I had to figure out sound, and I did that all myself, even the raven noises. And it was pretty big learning curve. From then on, yeah. So from then on, I'll just stick with this, I guess, till my last videos are done. Um, I came home in the summers and I would work as a summer student at the Haida Heritage Center in the Haida Gwaii Museum, and one summer in the Bill Reid Teaching Center with George A. McDonald and um, Brian Miles. I learned so much while I was working in the summer. We would give daily tours, and studying all of this information really helped my build myself up as my confidence as a young Haida person, especially when I'd go back to the city. I continued working on my animations and started to have breakthroughs and learning curves that took longer than I really expected them to because I drew so much. I thought this would come so much more naturally. In the spring of 2012, I traveled to LA with the illustration group at Emily Carr for an animation and illustration tour. We visited studios like Disney Channel, DreamWorks, which is here. That was outside of DreamWorks, the moon and the guy on the edge of the moon, and Cartoon Network and different independent illustrators. We had dinner in Beverly Hills at Ron Diamond's house. This was leading up to the Oscars, which was pretty wild. So I was there having dinner with a lot of these animators that I looked up to since I was 10. And I was talking about being Haida and where I was from, and either people were indifferent or thought I was making things up. And this was a pretty pivotal moment for me because I thought this is all I wanted. And so this was 12 years of my youth being dedicated to this. And as I was leaving, I felt really sad because I realized that this wasn't what I wanted to do. I wasn't quite ready to admit it that I was starting to lose my interest in animation. This trip to LA was conflicting, and I wasn't as fulfilled as I thought I'd be. But I realized that I was starting to love the idea of being Haida more than I loved the idea of traveling in traffic for 3 hours one way. In 2013, the Vancouver Art Gallery had their Charles Eden Shaw exhibition. The show was such a pivot point for me. I started skipping classes at Emily Carr to go visit the gallery and draw as much as I could. In my Indigenous Studies class, our teacher asked us not to draw that day and to pay attention. This class was important. I couldn't, to this day, I still don't even remember what happened in that class. I needed to keep drawing from my visit the day before at the Vancouver Art Gallery. He went around the room to see what we were doing for our writing. I don't even know what we were supposed to write about. And instead, I was drawing this bear down at the bottom, imagining if I was ever to make jewelry, what I would do for a design. And when he got to my table, all he said was, "Nice bear." So that was kind of a relief for me in that second. And I am this piece again, like the form line and the proportions crack me up so much, but it's a piece that I really owe a lot to. So I ended up dropping out of my grad class at Emily Carr. I was very heartbroken and it felt like an existential crisis. Everything I led up to at this point I thought was going to be my to way into where the world that I wanted to go into. And for whatever reason in my early 20s, I thought this meant I couldn't be an artist anymore. I was giving up my dream and I wasn't sure what I was going to do next. I was trying to make some Haida designs, and my cousin, she gently told me that I didn't know what I was doing. I was so upset with that comment, but it was true. I picked up my least favorite materials, which was watercolor, and I created this painting of Dogfish Woman. It had such a positive review on Facebook with so many people asking to buy prints. To me, this was my sign that I could still be an artist. Um, to me, also, it's looking back, I can see technical things that I would do differently now, but it's still a piece that I hold very high. So at the last second, I went back to Emily Carr to finish my remaining credit the next year, my grad class. I was so tired of having to answer to everyone in my community that I didn't graduate and that I dropped out. Instead of 8 months to a year to create a grad film, I had less than 3.5 months. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just wanted to animate. My teacher asked why I wasn't working in the field instead. I wanted to prove myself I could do it, which was graduate. Sorry, one second. So this is what I created, inspired by working at the Haida Museum. right, so slideshow. So after that, I moved home. I didn't really know what I was going to be doing for work or where I wanted to go as I was giving up that direction of animation. And I realized that I still didn't want to go back to animating. I was proud to come back and tell everyone I did it and I graduated so people could stop asking me if I finished my program. But funny enough, to this day, 15 years later, people still think I'm in school. Or 10 years later, sorry. So when I moved home, I kind of just took that time to really do nothing because I didn't know what I was doing. And around here, we have a lot of posters that go up for events. And Ben Davidson, he was teaching a 3 month long class. It was an introduction to formline design and an introduction to carving. And so I took that thinking that maybe this was my way of figuring out what I wanted to do next. And so I worked really hard at trying to learn how to paint and paint cleaner lines and also understand how to design. It was hard. It was such another big learning curve, and I was exhausted. I have tendonitis in both of my wrists, and so I found that carving was also not for me because my hands would be flared up every time from being in pain. But at the end of the class, we made soapberry spoons that we could either um, put oil on to use so that they could be usable, or we could paint them to be decorative. So I made this to give to one of my aunties, and I was really proud of the way that I painted the blues to kind of show that glimmer that hummingbirds have within their feathers. And when I showed it to Ben, he held it and went, huh. And I thought that was my moment that mastered Formline. So from then on, I continued doing Formline. This was later in that year of 2016. I was a YVR recipient for the Emerging Artist program. And so this was a watercolor painting I did, telling the story of Nana Simget, which is an epic tale about a killer whale man who stole Nana Simget's wife, and Nana Simget on his way to rescue his wife. So the killer whale is in form line, but in the eyeball is the killer whale's human form. Nana Simget's wife is in the dorsal fin, and the human is in the tail. And I thought this was the best I could ever do, and I was so proud of myself. And then I worked with watercolor techniques to kind of show this, like, I guess, moody thing of waves crashing. So from then on, I continued studying in masterworks in the museums whenever I could, looking at online databases or even creating different Pinterest boards. Through funding like YVR Art Foundation, I was able to travel to the Chicago Field Museum and the American Museum of Natural History in New York. I had opportunities to look at pit rivers in Oxford and the British Museum in London. And so I often like drawing with pen. Pen with erase or pencil, I'll erase quite often, but pen, I really have to commit to my lines. So it helps me create form and flow. Recently in the spring, I was invited by Evelyn Vanderhoop and her weaving mentees to join them on a museum study trip to visit the Museum of Civilizations and Royal Ontario Museum. I learned as much as I could about Nachin or Chilkat through Evelyn's teachings. So there's just some more studies working towards understanding that form of art. Within my practice, it took me a really long time to learn to say no or that I don't have time. But through that practice, I learned how far I can push myself and my abilities through different art forms. In 2022, Vancouver Mural Fest invited me to mural collab with Coast Salish artist Jesse Rakama. So we created this piece together. His piece is here at the end on the left side of the screen, and mine is on the right side. It's downtown Vancouver. In 2023, I was invited to collab with mural artist and Cowichan artist Charlene Johnny. We did this mural for the hospital here in Haida and Dodge and Geets. It's dedicated to the midwives we have here who run a very special and supportive program. For this one, it was the winter of 2023. My project for platforms, which was with the city of Vancouver, was installed. It's a vinyl mural at the Vancouver City Centre Canada Line station on Granville Street. The image here was Nunkilsloss, or else Raven, shedding off his bird form, so you could see his wings coming and his bird beak is coming off and he's transforming into his human form. The shapes on the side are the rectangular shapes, are meant to be the buildings in the downtown core of Vancouver. Often when we're coming to Vancouver, downtown is your first spot for wherever you're going about to stay or if you're going to go elsewhere. And so it's always kind of this overwhelming feeling for, small town folks to see the big city landscape. And in my head, he is excited to go shopping and trying to decide where to go first. This piece was really special. I was really not quite confident in it because I wasn't sure if it really translated that these were buildings. And since I moved home this spring, so many people who've called out to me in my community to thank me for having this piece here because, despite, Haida's traveling quite a bit, it's still overwhelming to travel and go into a city and leave your little comfort zone and things like that. And so many people said that was really like grounding for them to see this there. And one guy at the coffee shop told me that he used this to flirt with girls on his dates while he was in the city. So this piece always cracked me up too because of that. I'm just going to take some water real quick. So the works I create, as I said, always start in pen. Bic pen especially. They're cheap and affordable, and because they're so affordable, it's not as upsetting when people steal your pens. It's easy to replace. Pens, it's easier, as I said, to commit to your lines. And so I really like starting off with these small thumbnail sketches. Um, Printer paper is another necessity because I don't feel as committed as I do in a sketchbook to draw on printer paper. It's just easier to get sketches done without the idea that someone might look at these and worry if they're, nice enough to be in a sketchbook. And then from there, I'll take things and I'll either make them digital or I'll make them traditional style painting. So this was a print I released in December of 2022. With pen, I really like to adapt with markers. Crayola markers are great, especially if they're quick ideas, because they're also really cheap and they're water soluble, so they can blend really well. So sometimes if I'm drawing with pen, I'll have this idea of the colors that I want to emulate. So I'll use those markers to try and push that to get the idea of where I want to go. Through the museum's visits, I started to find more ways of speaking through Formline and how to create more, I guess, intricate forms. For me, I found that Formline started to become this own way, its own language that I would have with myself, basically, because there's different things that go into Formline between the shapes, the composition, and the flow and the proportion. And so it went from my original attempts of drawing formline designs of ovoid and U shape to creating these more intricate flowing pieces. Um, as I started to build myself more in my career, I started to think about as I'm now, I feel like progressing in the language of my art. What do I want to say more than just an introduction about myself and more about a feeling and like more, I'd like to say more conversation than just, yeah. Um, so in the New Year's of 2021, going into 2022, I actually lost my dad, and I started to work through that experience of grief a lot with my art. This piece was new growth. It was the idea of cracks in your foundation changing as time goes on, but through those cracks comes change and new growth. Um, this piece was Volcano Woman's Grief. This first came when I lost a friend and neighbor in the year prior on New Year's Day, actually, too. Um, and so this was inspired by one of our Haida stories, Volcano Woman. It's Chiloquin's, and she discovers her frog who was harmed by young boys by being thrown in a fire. And so this piece came from different inspirations, that being one, and also Bo Dick's show at the Bill Reed Gallery, The Box of Treasures. There is a Kokakua story called with the Atlakima masks, which were these white masks that are danced 4 times. Um, and then it's a story about different facets of humanity, is what Bo basically explained between laughter and joy and loss and grief. And the first facet that the main character goes through was going through the door of this longhouse in the forest. I don't want to say too much because it's not my story, but the idea of being the door being a facet and opening your mind was such a cool thing for me to like that stuck with me in a way about thinking in the world. And so in my head, this is Volcano Woman discovering her favorite frog who was hurt. And so around her is a door-like shape. And so this is the, I guess, the emotions of anger and grief being opened. And so on the side is kind of like panels for a longhouse, and it's an eagle design because Gilliquins is the first, or sorry, is the common ancestor for most eagle clans here. And so on the edge is her head that drops down, and at the bottom is a human figure that's hiding, and that's Property Woman who makes a noise, who was one of the survivors from Volcano Woman raining down fire. Um, so as I said, I used a lot of Haida stories to process that grief and understand what I was going through. Um, there were different parts of my grief story that I really leaned onto these stories to try and create and understand the feelings that I was having. And I often cry when I talk about this piece, so I'm going to keep it short because I don't want to cry and be recorded. Um, this piece is now we find ourselves 384,000 kilometers apart. And so this time I was really leaning on the idea of the berry picker and the moon. So it's the berry picker who's stuck in her moon, and the idea of this forced separation of being in the moon but still seeing her community on Earth. So this was coming up to the 1 year anniversary of losing my dad and understanding that I don't have him. And so I'm going to stop there because I know I'm going to start crying. Um, So this was a piece to show again the process of my sketching to final work. So in 2023, Melanie from the Inuit Gallery invited me to be a part of an art show, and she told me that she was really enjoying the works that I was creating. But I was coming to a place of not feeling as sad about the loss of my dad and moving on, and I was just like, gee, I don't know what to make, like I'm not as sad. So I sat in the park and I was drawing in my sketchbook, and I was thinking about a story that's often told here about a segment that's told when Raven steals the light, and when he drops it, it shatters into the different pieces for the moon, the stars, and the different phases of the moon. And so Eagle Woman goes down and collects those pieces, and then she puts them in the sky. And I really like that idea of just that calm space of grabbing those pieces and putting them and making the world beautiful. And so for me, this was a piece of like reflection of coming to terms on that loss. So this was pencil, crayon, and spit, and pen for the sketch. So I've continued studying my museum studies. I'll be heading off actually next Wednesday to go back to England to go to Pitt Rivers and the British Museum in London. And so this one was last year in New York when I got to go to the American Museum of Natural History. I've really come to love argillite carving and the more sculptural aspect within Haida art. This piece really took my breath away that I needed to draw it. And then so another part of my journey in my more contemporary time is and how I want to talk about my art. It's what can I do with my art? Um, and so a thing is going back to my love for animation and cartoons, but blending it with Haida art and figuring out ways that I can express that. So um, illustration and books have been a big thing for me right now. This is for an unpublished project with the Haida Nation, and it was on a story that one of the elders shared, and it was about the creation of the first Haidas. So I failed science in high school. I'm really bad at science, but apparently our oral histories coincide with archaeological findings and timelines. And so I guess with the three phases of life on Earth was came from the earth, the air, and then from the water. The current haidas that we have today, we all came from the water. And so the first haidas were made by Raven from Earth. Um, they didn't last for long, but if they said that if he maybe made them from rock, they would have survived longer. And so I love this visual of Raven sculpting humans from Earth. And so the form is them, but in the three watchmen form, which is I guess a iconography for here in our art form. In last year, 2024, Jake Kimball invited me to be a part of the Baka or Contemporary Native Art Biennale in Montreal. And the theme was creation stories. And I thought that would be such a cool one was to recreate that last drawing that I did, but maybe as a sculpture. And one of my friends asked me if I even knew how to sculpt. And I figured that was my time to take that as a challenge to see if I could. So this was a really fun piece. Also, a lot of learning curves. It was pretty scary. I dropped this entire piece on my desk from a high. I was painting it and I dropped it, and I thought I was done for because the deadline was the next day. But to my surprise, it was quite sturdy and didn't crack or break anywhere. Um, so again, these are another examples of more contemporary current works that I'm doing with using more classical style Formline and trying to see where I could push myself in the work that I want to do, which is really inspired by children's books right now, and just gearing towards that. So I'll be working with one of my mentors and friends, Nika Collison, to write a children's book, an illustrated children's book with her with Greystone. And then I'll have another book that I'll be doing with Greystone for a children's book as well. And this is kind of the style that I'm leaning towards, is trying to figure out how to blend this idea of classical Haida art, but also, contemporary. And then some more examples of integrating Formline and creating more of a visual look. And then I still do a lot of my emotional processing now through with my art. These were both from this year. The one on the left was from a pretty tragic loss we had in our community. And then this one was some sad girl feelings I had in the summer. And just trying to figure out ways that I could share with myself about what I'm feeling and how to create that imagery. So the first one is Grief Storm, My Heart is With You, because I felt pretty heartbroken for my family and also community members that were affected by this loss. And with the other one, it's Nurse Log. And so it was this idea where I wasn't really making art at the time, but I just was really struggling with wanting to make something, but nothing was really coming to me. And I was taking that as a time that I needed to just, I guess, hibernate, even though it was still summer and our hottest time of the weather. And it was I guess, an extension of new growth where it's like things are going to change. And so I did these four little saplings growing off of that nurse log because in um, our culture, four is a powerful number. And also, it's like the four pillars of a house. So to me, it was like building this new structure for where I was going. And then my last slide is just another idea about how to push myself with my work and also still have fun with it. So this was a concept that I've obviously not finished, but it was looking at children's art. I was looking at ways to, integrate art into this classrooms and different things. And I remember doing those scratch boards that we would make with paintings and crayons. And so I thought, what a fun way to do if Raven did an illustration of him and the chief's daughter in the sky world, when he stole the light from, and I imagined that was him and her in the dark, but the sun is who he's looking at and who's focused. And yeah, it's not finished because it actually took a lot longer to do. Anyways, that's my awkward end. Stop sharing my screen.
Wow, thank you so much, Shoshana. This has been just wow, what a beautiful presentation. So great to see your journey from that lens. Um, and the photos of your work and the process. Wow, just amazing. Thank you so much, Shoshana. I think I've really appreciated listening to you today and being part of this presentation. So thank you so much, and I hope that we get to hear more from you another time and stay in touch.
For
Thank you
sure.
all for attending. There's one more OLS session coming up, so please feel welcome to check out the website for that next session to register. And yeah, we're grateful for you all attending.
Awesome. Well, how was so much for having me, and how would everyone for joining? And I hope you have a great week.